Okay, Brain, it's, I guess it's Friday.
It is.
Thursday?
Thursday.
Saturday?
It's
something.
close, yeah.
I didn't even get the show up till Tuesday this week. What are you bringing?
Well, it looks like by way of Colorado, and Alex here. And Alex, introduce yourself.
I'm Alex Viera from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Very fortunate to be one of the finalists for the EVTV Build Your Dream EV contest. So,
Alex, one of our 10 finalists, and he's taken advantage of our offer to stop in and make the appeal directly. So we're going to kind of combine that with the show. Last week we did on a Kloppenberg, and he brought Jen.
He did. It looks like.
apparently
What are you bringing
I
here?
think they're on to you.
I think we've got a gig going on the alcohol thing. Again, we like to drink a little whiskey, play with a little high voltage, and go for a drive. I see you brought some Colorado whiskey.
Yep, this is Stranahan's. It's distilled right there in Colorado, kind of, as you said earlier, a microbrew distillery. You probably know more about them than I do. This is only the second bottle I've gotten to purchase, but we enjoyed it very much.
Where are they located?
I think it's near Morrison up there.
Near Morrison.
Yeah, because I know that they're up by one of the breweries because they custom brew their beer for their distiller's beer and pump it over from one of the breweries. So I'm not quite sure where they are.
In 1978, Billy Carter, God bless him, got his brother to pass a law allowing the brewing of up to 200 gallons per household of beer or wine. And that was enacted by Congress, and then was one of the last things Jimmy Carter signed into law.
And he still wasn't reelected.
And he still wasn't reelected.
That's amazing.
And fortunately. However, there were a couple of places that the microbrew beer thing went berserk.
Yeah.
I guess Oregon was pretty big, but really the capital was Denver. There were 250 microbreweries there.
Yeah, and they had the Great American Brew Fest is in Denver too every
Yes,
year. That was really the premier
they
event.
actually developed their own penny stock market.
Yeah.
And swindled a bunch of people out of a lot of money.
Yeah.
What was that, Blinder and Robinson?
Blinder,
they called them Blind 'em and Rob 'em.
Blind 'em and rob 'em, yeah.
And but it was quite a tale. Right today, there's a resurgence of more micro distilleries, which do have to have a license and pay the tax and so forth. But it's kind of grown out of that. So Stranahan's is a Colorado micro distillery, very small operation. Let's sommelier, show us your magic stuff here.
I don't need a corkscrew, so I'm looking good.
I need a pair of scissors.
Look at that.
Comes with
And
its
even
own
comes
shot
with its own
glass.
shot glass, you gotta love that.
That you can share with your friends.
Yeah. Just in case, you're in a pinch in the car on the way home.
Right,
you know?
right.
That's for those who measure.
Right. Just in case you're in a pinch on the way home.
If you're uncomfortable drinking straight out of the bottle.
We like our Riedel Scotch glasses better. But yeah, we're getting where we have regular visitors, and they bring whiskey. I like this, Brian. I don't think we're ever going to make any money with this EV thing, but
One way or another,
it could work out.
We'll be okay.
Okay, now what do we say in Colorado? I guess it's cheers.
Yeah,
Cheers.
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 Maybe bottoms up.
Bottoms up.
What do they say in the Air Force?
I say.
God save the Queen?
No, not in this Air Force. No, it's I don't know what you'd say in the Air Force. Just who's buying the next round?
Who's buying?
That's right.
Yeah, drop your coin on the counter, and if someone doesn't have their coin, they're buying the next round.
I really shouldn't drink. I like it too much. Alex, tell us about your
Not bad.
entry. I like your whiskey.
Yeah, that is.
Unfortunately for you, the contest is now out of my hands. I've done my part, and
I tell you, Jack.
I have one more part. That's like ship the stuff. That'll be painful, but
Yeah.
at this point, it's our viewers. Alana got you're a little behind.
Just a little bit, though. Making progress in the
Are
last
you?
week.
Yeah.
Some
A
good
lot
progress
of
in
them
the
have
last
been
week.
campaigning pretty hard.
Yep.
We encourage that, of course, but ultimately, I don't know how much it matters. We're going to run that over 90 days, and
Right.
I think in the end, when you total it all up, it's going to be, I hope, our viewers' estimate of who can take that investment in components and move the ball the farthest as far as our mission, and most of theirs, as it turns out, are quite in common, which is to convert the world to electric drive.
Yeah.
What are you going to do for them if we give you this pile of stuff?
Well, I plan to convert a Subaru. I was kind of looking at the ideas that you were kicking around last fall. In a couple shows, you were talking about folks who had contacted you interested in converting EVs for a living and what it would entail. And you had the suggestion, which I think is a reasonable one, to learn to do one car really well and refine the process so that you get good and cheap enough at it that you actually have a profitable enterprise. And I think in the case of Colorado, where I live, four-wheel drive vehicles are very much in demand, necessity in a lot of places. And it's also, they're very common. The Subaru is every third car on the road you see practically is a Subaru in Colorado. And
Well, it ought to be a car you like. Do you like this?
I do. Well, I had owned an Audi for about 10 years and really enjoyed the Audi. And when I went to look for a replacement, I was looking at Audis and Subarus and talked to some mechanic friends of mine who said that they had their opinions about both cars, and it seems like the Subaru is a reliable automobile, a more reliable automobile from the kind of maintenance schedule standpoint. Things tend to wear out less frequently. Things tend to last longer on a Subaru. So I kind of decided to go the Subaru route, which is I've always owned German cars, and so it's a little bit of a departure from what I'm necessarily used to. But I've been driving my little Subaru now for about 6 months and just love it. It's got lots of pep, lots of room. I think that they're going to make a great platform for conversions for my area. I'm not going to try and deliver these things to Texas or Florida.
Right. No,
People
I
don't care about those there.
That's a local thing, and of course, then the people you sell the cars to have someone that they can take it to when there are problems.
Exactly. Do they have problems when you're done with them?
You know, the book is that they just don't have the maintenance of a regular car. But yeah, we've run into a number of little things
Here and there.
that go back. Oddly, we blow DC to DC converters.
Yeah,
I'm
that's been
starting
our-
to think it's kind of a noise surge type issue.
Yeah.
But we've lost a number of those kind of mysteriously. There's no preliminaries or anything, just suddenly we don't have 12 volts. But no, most of them are still in the development stage when we have a problem with them. But,
Sure.
you know, things can happen. Wayne Alexander called this week to
Oh, he
report
did.
his record. He did an S10 conversion in 2 work days.
Wow.
Wayne does EVs for food. Now,
There's a
he's done more of it
contestant for a
than
build show.
Oh my gosh.
And so, you know, I think he had a lot of it lined up ahead of time, but still, a 2-day
That's amazing.
conversion is kind of amazing.
That's amazing.
Of an S10. We do it a little differently here, and I guess in slow motion by comparison. But we get a little better on the Porsches with each one. The Mini Cooper has been very complex. Of course, we've played with a couple of controllers, and we almost use it as a test bed
We
for
do
stuff
really,
at
yeah.
this point, you'd
Right.
have to say.
Right.
But you know, if we did those Porsches, and I'll probably do one every year for the rest of my life. You know, my theory is if you would do a conversion and sell it for what it costs you to do it, and then do another one, you'd make a little bit on the second one, and you'd make a little bit more on the third one. And by the time you've done about 10 of them, you'd be making a pretty good living.
I believe so, yeah.
Just because you right size the components, you know, you might not need quite that big a pump as the first pump you found.
And you don't have to do all the measurements over and over and over
Right,
again.
right,
The little
right.
brackets you have to build and mounting doodads. You build them once, you measure them, you write it down on paper, and when you come to do it again, you just
You could
knock
work
it
out the wire links and just build a wire harness.
Right,
you
build a
know?
nice harness, exactly. Yeah.
You know, with everything the right length and color coded right. The adapters, you know, a lot of things you can get in groups. Just buy 10 of them, and you know it's going to be 70% of the cost of getting one of them made. And so, you know, I just think if you did the same car a number of times, that you just get a lot better at it, and your costs would go down. And the premium, the value proposition for an electric car, I actually am not a believer. I don't think we're there yet.
not yet. And that's the first question I get from people who I talk to about converting electric cars. They say, well, when do you get your money back? Well, when do you get your money back from your gasoline car? It's an eternal money pit.
When do you get the money back from your 26-inch
Right.
TV screen?
You spend the money on what you want to spend it on, and
But they still, you know, when you have a Chevy Cruze, it gets 26 or 28 in town and 42, I think, on the freeway anyway, and it's $22,000. And then here's a Chevy Volt, which they're shooting at $40,000 for next year's cloth seat model. Well, that's $18,000 premium on a car that already gets good mileage. So it's not anybody wealthy or impoverished has a sense of you know, the value proposition, whether they're getting you know, a good value for their money. I mean, nobody wants to just squander it, you know, like a drunken sailor. So you know, I don't think we're there yet as far as production cars. There are people who would like to have an electric, and if you come up with a specialty, a car they like, and you know, I like cars that have cults, like the Mini, and the Subaru does the same
Subaru
thing.
does too, yeah,
They have a
absolutely.
group of people that are just, they ain't gonna drive anything else, and that's all there is to it.
and there are people who love to
They're on
spend
their
money on them,
ninth
too.
Outback, and that's just, you know.
Right.
And the people who
That's
spend
it.
money racing them too, and modifying the the high-powered ones, and it'd be really fun to pull up my little plain Jane one and smoke them.
There you go. There's
See,
some
now I'm
motivation.
talking Brian's
That's
language.
right. There's some motivation. The little Subaru sleeper.
That's right, exactly.
So you're in the Air Force in Colorado
correct.
Springs?
Yep.
And you're a musician.
I am.
And, but you were attracted to this notion professionally?
The notion of being in the Air Force? Or
No, the notion of converting cars to
Oh.
electric.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to be retired. I could retire in about 7 years, and trying to figure out kind of things I'd like to do when I grow up someday. And this is a really appealing direction for me to go in. When I was in college, in kind of tandem studying music, I was pursuing a degree in recording arts and sciences. So I took a lot of electrical engineering classes at Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
So I have a background, and I've always had a real intense curiosity about all things electronic and how things work, and I love taking stuff apart, much to my parents' dismay growing up. And so I was able to learn a lot about how things work when I was in college. Ended up choosing music actually music chose me as a career. That's usually the way it works, and been very fortunate to be able to pursue that. But it's always been in the back of my mind that I'd love to contribute something with the left side of the brain to the world as well. And I think that electric cars changing the way we view transportation would be just an absolute blast to be part of. So yeah, it's the music thing was sort of the side thing that I was able to do professionally, and you know, I'm looking into what might be next for me after this career.
So with the contest, if you get the components, you do a Subaru prototype.
Yeah,
And then try to leverage that into a
absolutely.
small garage business converting.
Yeah, and it'll take, like you said, a number of years to kind of refine it, but that's about what I have in terms of what I have left of my time in the Air Force. So it works out nicely, I think, in terms of my life plan.
Well, good.
Yeah.
No, that does sound appealing. Is there anything else you wanted to cover as far as the contest or your plans?
Well, you know, I was thinking about there's a really kind of nice diversity of finalists.
Yes, there is.
I mean, it really runs. There's a guy with a boat.
Yeah, I went through a boat.
I did not see that coming. So I think that it's fun to try and set yourself apart to the viewers out there. So maybe you vote for me. But I think that from what I've seen of the different contestants, I think me and maybe one other have the most, I would think, interest for the average listener or average viewer to your show, because I'm an average guy. I don't have a degree in mechanicking, although I've been working on my Volkswagens for a long time by myself. But I don't have I'm a ton of mechanical experience. I have a lot. I've built motors and things like that for Volkswagens. But so I think I really would appeal to the average guy out there. Is if you give someone all this stuff to work on and you want to get the most bang for your buck and what can be learned from the process, I think it really stands to reason you want to take someone who hasn't done a project or two or three and give it and let them kind of feel it out and go through the process and report regularly, which I think is real important. We bought a video camera and I'm really looking forward to putting some stuff up on the website, because I want to get in and around the car. We just got the camera right before we went on vacation. So we're going to get the car up on the lift and go around and measure things. And I'm going to order these mock-up motors from is it EV Source in Utah? So those are going to be lots of fun, just to go to a junkyard and see how does it fit? Where can we put, is this motor too big? Is this one the right size or whatever? So I'm really looking forward to getting some real solid plans out there on the website, so people can see that I'm really serious about completing this project. This is an amazing opportunity to take advantage of, and I plan on really getting as much preparation done as I can to prove to people who are kind of waiting to vote, the people who aren't my family and friends. To get them let them know that I'm really serious about trying to plan this thing out very carefully. And as far as like trying to mock up batteries, I got some good ideas for that. So I'm really excited about about the opportunity to let everyone see if they think that I'm average Joe enough for you. I'm not taking a project that's already been done and just dropping some lithium batteries in there. I don't really see the point of that, because they're not really going through the process anymore. You've already figured it out one time. It's just going to be a different source of power.
Right.
And I think that it's some of the projects I love what the guys have the types of cars they've picked, because they're just cool. I love, because of my VW background, I love the Porsche 914 idea. That's a great one. It's been done a bunch of times. I don't know how many lithium ones are out there, but the 914's been done a bunch of times. The Subaru, like I said, I was talking to you earlier, there are very few examples out there. The ones I found in the EV album are usually rusty piles of crap and powered by lead-acid batteries. Yeah. So I think they're a really stout car, a good platform, very popular in my area, and I think they'd be a great car to build on for a project. So.
Yeah, I do too. I think it would be a good car, and that whole Colorado course is, I've still got a home in Denver. Lived out there for 19 years. I don't go there much anymore.
No,
but
not really.
I'm familiar with the area. Brian's lived out there.
Yeah, 10 years.
That's where we did Boardwatch magazine, and the ISP Con and so forth was out of Littleton, Colorado. And so I've still got 2 daughters out in Colorado. So the four-wheel drive thing is kind of a necessity, and the Subaru is probably, I would guess, the most economical four-wheel drive you could have out there.
You can get virtually anything you want in four-wheel drive.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah. Anything you can think of. And the most popular
four-wheel drive motorcycles?
That's an idea.
It's an
You can
idea.
get 2-wheel drive motorcycles.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah. No, we've got some great finalists. As far as the car goes, I probably like Colin Stanley's Scrape, and I think he's dead last right now.
I know.
Well, it's a beautiful car. That would be and talk about tons of room for batteries. You'd have to lift it a little bit to compensate for the weight of the battery, or else it'll just be stuck and not scrape.
I think you could bring the name to life and just, it's a fiberglass body. It'd be low enough after you got done scraping it off.
Yeah, that's right. It'll wear down.
If it's fiberglass, it'll be self-adjusting,
15,
right?
20 miles, it'll be just about the right height.
Yep. Just keep going back and forth over the same speed bump a few times. It'll be just the right height.
I guess if I see anything, it would be, move the ball a little bit toward more upscale cars and newer cars. And we've got some people in the EV community, and this was very true for quite some time, that you could take any old discarded car, basically, and reprise it in lead acid and get it to move, and it was a thing.
With a forklift motor and a rheostat.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we've moved past that, and now the situation's fairly serious. I'd like to see an actual gradual adoption of electric drive for real people with real cars. I acknowledge the standard S-curve, adoption curve of all technology. So we have to go after early adopters right now, which is people that can basically afford any car they want, and you're probably not selling them their first car or their only car.
Right.
Typically, they'll have 4 or 5 cars in the family already. So this is a new gadget thing for them, and you have to appeal to them with it. I think the OEMs are going the wrong direction, and I think our legacy lead acid junk car is the wrong direction. How about a new direction, which would be really cool cars that are electrically powered? And I like Tesla, but I think there's a lot of room at a lot less money than the Teslas.
Yeah. The average conversion with lithium-ion is going to be half the price of a Tesla.
Even half the price of a Model S.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I.
Never mind the $150,000 for the Roadster, and understand. I think the Roadster is a gorgeous car in almost all respects. But
It is.
Even I can't write a check for $150,000 for a 2-seat car
And a lot of people
to
just
play with on
can't
the weekend.
fit in it.
Yeah, well,
I have an uncle in San Francisco who has the means. He could write a check, no problem, and he went to test drive one, and he couldn't test drive it because he's 6'4", and he
Just couldn't fit in the
couldn't
car.
steer the car because his knee was in the way.
6'4" is a problem. There's another dimension that gets you in trouble too. That's kind of side to side. That's where I come in. It may hold 2, but 2 of me won't fit in that car. In fact, Brian's kind of against the window with me in the car, so
turn
that
right.
isn't quite happening. More broadly, how did you take an interest in this? I mean, there's thousands of cars, and most of them gasoline-powered.
Sure.
A musician in the Air Force, why did you get interested in electric cars at all?
I've been working on my own cars since high school because I couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it, and I bought a little Volkswagen Bug, learned how to fix everything on it.
Yep.
Sort of a lot of people's starter experience with cars is owning a Volkswagen Bug.
Uh-huh.
But I just, from studying more and more about how the internal combustion engine operated, I was just always struck by how we've got this technology that we've been infinitesimally improving over the last 100 years that is still horribly inefficient and really will always remain that way. There's just, if we haven't reached the limit, we've got to be coming close. And so electric vehicles would give you a 6-time advantage in efficiency when viewed from the power consumption standpoint. So it seems to me to be a no-brainer. My dad had books at the house when I was growing up about electric cars, but that was back in the 70s when he was reading that kind of stuff. And I think he probably put the idea in my head of that such a thing was possible, but the technology wasn't around yet. And it was really just, I had been kind of following a little bit. I'd heard of lithium-ion, but then I'd heard they had problems. And then a lot of it was because I stumbled across your website, just kind of doing a random search, and sort of watching some of the videos that you were putting out about a year and a few months ago. And you were actually talking about the batteries and testing them and showing really what they could do and how rugged they were, how reliable they were. And I was really impressed. Far more, it's not even the power output available and the energy and density of them compared to lead acid, it's also the reliability and the low maintenance really that they require. So so I thought
Well, that's what got us in it.
Yeah, it really
exactly. I
was
mean,
really
and you found it and put it out there, thankfully. That's, I mean, you joke about the whiskey not being able to affect anything with the outcome of the contest, but really it's sort of like, thanks for all the work you're doing. It's my little small way of contributing to, keep you guys going, keep the spirits up,
Keep us motivated.
keep you motivated. That's right. So
Keep us coming in on Fridays.
Yeah. I was just taking down 2 batteries today, brand new ones, to put in a car, and got to doing something and forgot them and
You did
screwed
today.
up another 2 cells. I mean, I've got more bad batteries than any of our viewers have good batteries.
We've worn them out.
No,
but
just
someone's got to do the
mistakes
testing.
and stuff
Someone
like
has
that.
has to prove that these things are.
This was just an accidental screw up, in the shop. I got doing something else and
You'd wander away and don't come
didn't,
back.
didn't
yeah.
pay attention and should have had something set up to stop it. Yeah, but I just had a big old resistor about this long hooked up to it.
I saw that.
Gotta get you
The
a cheap kitchen timer or
mental
something.
lapse. Actually, I did check it, and I skipped. It was 2 cells, and I skipped from 6 volts to 3 volts.
Oh, you forgot it was 2 cells?
Yeah, I actually did check it, and
Yeah,
and
and
it
it
just
just
had a
didn't make any
mental
sense.
lapse.
Looking for the wrong number.
Suddenly 3 volts made perfect sense. Well, it's actually 1.5 volts a cell. It's not, and so I cooked it some more.
It wasn't low enough.
Hasn't changed yet. That's weird. Let's crank it up some more.
Yeah. So just I'm getting older, and my hair's thinning out, and I can't remember my name and how to get home, which is, as you saw, a block and a half.
Not that difficult.
So, but yeah, that's. So, where do you see the future of it going? How do you think this is all going to play out, Alex?
Well, I think it's that we're seeing a trickle down in the technology. Tesla's doing it the smartest way, I think, by bringing it to cars that are now getting into a price range that is really a common price range for people to pay for a car, in the $50,000 range, $50,000 to $60,000. They're playing against Audi and BMW and
Yeah, it's a
Mercedes-Benz.
luxury car.
So
Right.
it's a luxury car they're marketing. It has way more room than any of those average sedans would have.
It's amazing.
It's incredible.
People aren't really talking about that
Oh.
yet because they don't know.
Yeah, but it's going to make a
size.
huge
Picture a
impact.
European sedan
Yep.
with a third more space in it.
Right.
It's now I don't know quite without a big elaborate thing how to describe how they're doing that and what that would mean in a car, except
It's good.
it's good. It's going to be a lot of space in a pretty small
Yeah.
car that's all yours.
Yeah.
And it'll be something new
Yeah.
and different for people that will not have experienced that before.
And you pick your range too, which is a great option they're throwing out there too. Hopefully they'll follow through on that, where you
well,
pay more for more range, which is good.
they're going to start out with I'm told, with the long range one first.
Okay.
For all the people that have a deposit down, you'll have to wait till later if you want the shorter range. I don't think they'll ever sell any of the shorter range.
You don't think so?
Well,
I guess
let's-
people have the
let's
money
say
to spend. Why would they?
77 for 300 miles and 67 for 220 and 57 for 160. What are you going to pick?
Yeah. Well, if you got that kind of money to spend.
If
You get the 300 miles.
If you can pay 56,000, why can't you pay 77,000? I mean, it's
Probably not many
almost
people
like-
financing these cars.
No, there's nobody financing these
Yeah.
cars.
No, it makes sense. So the next step after that is one tier down, and then it will eventually trickle down to, Hyundai Sonata type car, and then the question is how long will it take, and that's what is really unclear. No one has a crystal ball to know exactly when that will happen. But
Well, I do.
in the meantime,
And-
that's when people who want to convert.
I was famous for my crystal ball in the last rodeo, and the last rodeo was 12 or 15 years. Even when you can see what ought to happen, and you can even see how it's going to happen, there's still 10 or 12 or 15 years from it happening. It does not actually happen as quickly as you think. It never did. And we went through all that on the internet, and I think, yeah, it will. The adoption curve, it will be adopted.
Yeah. I think it's
I mean, the
inevitable.
other scenario is people don't want electric cars and we should drive gasoline, but I don't really see how that works.
Yeah, that would be difficult,
Yeah.
as the only alternative, which gas
Yeah.
is now. I don't see it,
Yeah.
not being adopted, electric
Yeah,
vehicles.
yeah. It's the only alternative that's on the horizon. Your fuel cells, or where do you get the hydrogen? There's no answer for that. That's inexpensive enough. So,
I do not think electric cars are going to kill gasoline cars. I think I'd be able to buy a brand new gasoline car for the rest of my life.
Absolutely.
because there's going to be a need for that type of transportation. If you want to take a drive across the country like my wife and I are doing right now, you got to have something that can go 400 miles between stops. That's the expectation that's been set.
Right,
So, and electric may get there, but it's not there yet. And
Oh,
so-
I think we could easily see a 400-mile electric car within 5 years. That can happen.
But heavy hauling for trucks, I don't know.
No,
That
I
might
don't.
Be possible.
I don't- Well, they can haul a lot of batteries too, but
Yeah.
I like T-Boone Pickens compressed natural gas for trucking pretty well.
Yeah, fleets and trucking, absolutely, yeah.
They can haul those tanks around and it'll be cleaner and cheaper. The trucks, if you can shave some of that fuel cost, it's money for them. They're very
That's a
much.
big deal.
Arnold Larsgaard was talking about a drag reducing function for trucks. And it's a good question why you don't have a tailboat on the back of a trailer to reduce drag, because it would pay for itself. And the answer that I gave him was the problem is loading docks. The back end of that trailer is not really designed to drive down the road. It's designed to pull up to a standard loading dock, seal completely around it, the door open without any, it actually doesn't, it goes straight up, and they roll the stuff off, roll new stuff on.
It takes 15 minutes. You're in, you're out.
And then they're back en route. So how do you put something to reduce drag on something that inherently has to be square and vertical?
Yeah,
And,
it's tough, yeah.
So, but there's a lot of things that can be done with trucks. Alex, thanks for coming by and bringing us a shot of whiskey and telling us your
betcha.
story. I
very
want to wish you the very best of fortune in the upcoming contest as that winds out across the summer. I think you're an excellent prospect,
Thank
and
you.
and have an
Absolutely.
excellent chance of taking the whole thing. And I'd be very comfortable that I've spent a bunch of money on the right thing. If you would win the
Well,
pile
thank you.
of
I appreciate
stuff,
that.
and I think it would be a good application, and you'd move the
Yeah.
mark. And I was surprised, I guess, by how many of the contestants, and not just the finalists, but of all the contestants, I would say 85% of them mentioned the concept of converting cars for a living somewhere in the
Yeah,
two
industry,
essay
absolutely.
paragraphs
That's right.
along the way, and that caught me off guard.
How else are you going to get a car these days? If you have to want the Leaf, or you have to be able to afford a Tesla, and that's it. Those are your options.
No,
So-
well, we saw a different option. Missouri's kind of a show me state and a little bit into the self-reliance thing, My take on the whole thing was I get a little anger going and a little frustration, a little resentment, just a gas line or the gas price, you know, as long as it's all pretty innocent, I go along with it. You know, I'm a pretty good scout. But when I start to think they're manipulating me for cash,
2008.
yeah,
That was an interesting scenario there.
it just right up the back of my head that it's kind of like an old dog. It just starts to stand up,
Yeah.
and when they'll be fairly brazen about this. They basically tell you on the TV and so forth that you don't really have any choice. You just have to pay.
Oh, and by the way, we have record profits this year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Yeah, the top 5
Yeah.
corporations in the world were oil companies, and there's only a dozen countries that have a GDP more than these 5 corporations.
Corporations, yeah.
But somehow they're a victim right along with you,
Oh.
and we really ought to feel sorry for them. And I'm seeing people around me here in Cape lose their homes because they can't afford to drive to work and make the house payment. And I'm thinking, you know, I was 54 at the time, I think. I'm 54 years old. What if I just tell this bunch of sand bunnies to go blow me? What would that look like? Well, I'd have to bicycle and walk, and I don't mind doing that, except, you know, the car is really not transportation, particularly in a local area like here. It's your environment. If I want to haul groceries, what am I going to do? Carry 2 bags of groceries 2 miles? You know,
Not in the summer.
how about if it's 100 degrees out?
Yeah.
Am I going to walk a mile? I mean, a mile and a half, 2 miles is not too much to walk, even for me. But if it's 100 degrees out, am I
It
going to
gets
walk?
brutal.
How about 20 degrees?
Yeah.
How about when it's raining or snowing? And so your car is really your little environment bubble. You know, that's what protects you when you go out and move about. And personal mobility is a big part of our productivity and our why we can accomplish so many things is because we can whip out a cell phone and talk to somebody very easily, and we can get in a car and go somewhere. We don't have to hook up the goat to the cart and you know, this sort of thing. I could buy a horse.
Didn't you live in Colorado?
I did.
We ate the
and I've lived in Missouri. I could just buy a horse, and but then I got to get him out. I got to talk to him a little bit. They have emotional issues. You got to saddle them up. You got to do all this to go somewhere where I'm going to go, get something and come back. And then I got to unsaddle the horse and put him up and feed him and so on. So, you know, it's kind of like let's stick a stick in the sand and say, hey, I'm not going to play anymore, and I don't have a job or anything. I can do this, but what does that mean? And it started to look like, well, I'm just got to go in the garage and make me a car. And so I did, and it worked. And I really didn't even change my own oil. I do know a little bit about electronics and electrical things by past careers, but it worked well enough, and so our advocacy was if I could get a grassroots movement going like the internet, where people simply, their mission is to make a car for themselves. If there was just 100,000 guys went and made their own car, their neighbors are going to have questions why they never show up at the gas station. And I've seen how the world changes in this scenario. It's actually how it really changes. The thing about the president and the Congress and the Chevrolet and so forth, they're not going to
Never
do
works that
anything
way.
for you. That's not how it works. That's the level of naivete there, I'm sorry, is I can't even comment on it. You just
But that's
got,
what
if
the
that's
talk-
how you believe it works, God love you, go for it.
But that's what the
we're
talking
we're
heads told
busy
me.
actually doing it. So
Yeah.
you go to the garage and you build your own car, and that's if enough people did that, it would do it. But I was stunned to see how many people saw this as a vocation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have to point out, we didn't stop after we built me a car, so I don't have a leg to stand on in this debate.
Right. Keep going.
We just keep making cars. I don't know what's to become of all of them, but
Probably take one of them off your hands, I think.
well, and then you get to the value proposition. I had a guy who he was a graduate of MIT, the Mexican Institute of Technology, and he wanted to buy one of the Porsches, and I told him what it was, and he told me, well, that's too much money. Well, compared to what?
Yeah.
The other electric Porsche you were looking at?
Right,
or,
right.
What are we talking about?
Yeah, he's got a really good deal lined up somewhere else.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
what's
Yeah,
your
right.
point of reference
I'll
here?
pass on
Yeah,
this one and
yeah.
buy the other one.
Yeah, and so I don't know, but I was stunned to see the level of people that weren't just going to change the world by changing their personal behavior, but were willing to do this as a vocation
Sure.
and change their career. I mean, you can do an electric car, frankly, in 3 months of part-time effort. I mean, you have to go to the garage, kind of.
If the parts are all
Every
ready to
evening.
go.
Yeah, right. No, that's really kind of waiting on parts
Yep.
and stuff.
Yep.
If you go sweep out a spot in the garage and have some idea what kind of car, for the car, and I would say $17,500 in parts, in 3 months you can be rolling. You'll have things to play with for another couple of months, little issues,
still
you know,
roll,
like
yeah.
you were saying,
Right.
Cavalier and so
Right.
forth. But I mean, you know, on one perspective, there's always something else. But frankly, you're talking about a 3-month project and $17,000. It's not even bass fishing money,
That's right.
and you wind up with a car.
Right.
I mean, pick a hobby. What
Yeah.
do you like? What did your instrument cost you?
A new bassoon would run you anywhere between $23,000 and $50,000.
I'm telling you,
Right.
that's for a bassoon.
For a bassoon.
Don't get me started on a bagpipe.
Yeah. So I mean, I know what you mean with
pick a hobby.
right.
What
right.
what hobby do you want? You know, duck hunting, bass fishing.
Yeah.
I mean, none of them come. 17.5 is not crazy talk.
No. Yeah. That's a camper.
it's-
It's
yeah,
a
it's-
cheap camper.
Yeah.
It's a top
It's
camper.
a cheap camper for somebody, and you haven't put the pots and pans in it yet.
No, I know this is like
Or
from-
bought the truck to pull it.
Right, exactly. And so when I say that you can convert a car, and you know, a lot of whining about how much it costs, how much a car. I can't change how much cars are. I can't change any of the context of this. But why would I need to? It doesn't. What's the payback period on your couch? I mean, some of these questions are just like, I try to deal with them, but they're frankly nonsense.
Yeah.
You know, and the cost of converting a car, if you do it yourself, you can do a lithium iron phosphate 100-mile range car for about $17,500 in components.
Right.
Now we've proven it.
Yes.
This is not a guess. And an average individual, a lift is a big help.
Yes.
But they're $2,500 for a lift.
Yeah. Yeah. Or less.
And you
Like-
still have the lift.
Yeah.
You know, so there's some basic tools and things. So, you know, 20 grand all in, and 3 months of your life, and you're driving the car.
Right.
You know, we're not talking about a change in career here.
No, it's yours. It has a value.
You
You're doing
can be
something.
driving an electric. You don't have to give up other cars. Keep them all.
Yeah.
You don't have to give up anything.
One of us get really dusty after a time.
You will find that you need some of that fuel stabilizer
That's
for your Escalade, or it will go bad in the tank and gum up the place, and everything with the seals start leaking on a brand new car because you've had it sitting there for 9 months without driving the thing. That's an issue, but there's a ready market for them, and so you know my advocacy was for individuals to take 3 months and $17,000 or $18,000 and a car they liked already and convert it and drive it.
Right.
And that's not a earth moving. It would change the world, by the way.
Yep.
But it's, and you know, it's kind of fun, and they can take it to shows and stuff and show other people, and that advocacy then is what has the impact.
Right. You have to have something to show.
You do.
You have to be able to take someone for a drive so they know this is for real.
Mm-hmm.
And you put your foot down on the pedal and the thing takes off and they say, wow, that's not a golf cart.
That's a car.
That's
Yeah.
a car. That's
That's
exactly
a car.
what this
It
car
drives
feels
like a
or
car.
better.
Right.
It acts like a car. I don't have any
Yep.
big elaborate procedures to go through to make it drive like a car.
Yep. Tim Cavalier took me for a drive in a Z3 and he put his foot down and it scoots.
It scoots. Huh?
It scoots. It takes off. So it is a fun car to drive. And again, he's an average guy. And he did that he just had a 3-bay garage and just cleared out 1 bay, and that's where he works on it. So.
The way you do this is start by sweeping out a spot. You can't have, you know, your winter tires and your coats from 12 years ago, and the baby bed that the kids in college give the baby bed up. You know, in your way, you got to sweep all that out of the garage, but. That's the first step, is sweeping away the spot. But I was amazed at the number of you that see this as a vocation. Now, if we project that forward to like the internet service providers, at the peak we had 7,500 people selling access to the internet, and we did the directory and trade show for them.
And you equate those to the conversion people for EVs? The same
Sure.
site
Why could you not have 4,000 to 5,000 shops in the country, each doing 40 or 50 cars a year?
Right.
That's
and then you get bought out, and that's your paycheck. Yeah.
Right.
you know, I hear about consolidation, and so everybody wants to jump to the end. We haven't done the beginning part yet. Go talk to some of the internet service providers that read Boardwatch magazine and find out what happened to them. They did get gobbled up. It was not a horrifying experience. Most of them cashed out at about $220 a subscriber.
Yeah.
Was the going rate.
Yeah.
But I saw $240 and $270 paid. And, you know, somebody with 8,000 or 10,000 people did pretty well with that. And I know a lot of them to this day that are pretty well fixed from the internet days of the bubble. So it you know, I'm not guaranteeing any of that will happen with electric cars, but I could easily see 4,000 shops across the land without, it wouldn't even change the landscape for the existing little auto garages that are across the land already. And the whole kit car, custom car thing, if you want a model to aspire to, go take a tour of the UK. There's hundreds of people making 20 cars a year. But there, the car goes beyond a little bit of your identity. Like I line up with Chevy, the more unique the car is, the better the people like.
Right.
So if you have a car that the guy's only ever made 50 of, that's a good thing in England.
Right.
They don't mind that at all.
Like that uniqueness.
Anyway, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Good
Thanks for
luck with
having
the
me.
contest, and
Thank you.
you know,
You're welcome.
we'll
Thank you.
go from there.
Yeah.
Brain, let's talk a little bit about Cobra Motors.
All right.
Netgain Motors, home of the Warp, Transwarp, and Impulse motors, introduced the improved Warp 9 motor. The Warp 9 is a 9 1/4 diameter series wound DC motor with a double-ended shaft featuring 26 improvements for 2010. Externally, the terminal studs have been enlarged from 3/8 to 1/2 inch diameter. Bigger is better. On the inside, a larger commutator, new brush composition, and split brush design with heavier springs handle even higher voltages and currents than before. Our new fan increases airflow by almost 50% over typical paddle-style fans. And all this translates into improved performance. For even more performance or larger applications, take a look at Netgain's Warp 11 motor. An 11 3/4 diameter series wound DC motor for even greater torque and power. Since 2002, Netgain Motors has been leading the EV industry with precision, performance, and price. Visit us at go-ev.com. Netgain Motors, warp power to go.
Okay, let's talk about electric motors. I know little about it. So this should be an interesting discussion. What kicks this off, as you know, we've undertaken a project to make a Cobra kit car, electric drive. The car is built by B&B Manufacturing of Granby, Missouri. And we're doing this for a company in Taiwan called Aptima Motors. As part of the negotiations to doing that, we decided that we would share information, and whatever I picked, that's what they would receive. That put some pressure on me to pick well. As we announced previously, we've gone with the Tremec TKO 600 transmission, which comes in a Ford bell housing or a GM. We've chosen the Ford. This transmission will do up to 600 foot-pounds of torque. It has 5 speeds, which gives us some luxury, and we've got the one with the overdrive gear at 0.64, which should give us a pretty alarming top speed and good acceleration through the first 4, and should be able to handle quite a bit of torque. We've coupled that with a 11-inch ceramic on both faces, clutch disc, and a pressure plate that's sufficiently severe. We've had to go to a hydraulic clutch to operate it. We think with that Ford 9-inch rear end, that'll be a pretty strong drivetrain. And we need to apply some power to it, which is why we spent that money on the transmission. We've looked at a number of different things, and then found something kind of in our own backyard that I think you ought to know about. We've selected the Netgain Motors Warp 11 HV motor as the driver for this Cobra that we hope is a little bit high performance in addition to having a good range. This motor is an enigma to me. George, God love him, I guess he's doing pretty well. They're sold out of their June build of Warp 9, so you can't get one of those for several months. And so he's doing pretty well. But his marketing, we would do things differently, I think. He calls this a Netgain Warp 11 HV. HV stands for high voltage. And I assumed it was a Netgain Warp 11, somehow fixed to do high voltage. It's an interesting motor. As we've looked into it and talked to George about it, it's nothing of the sort. It's related to a Netgain Warp 11 motor as it is to our AC50. This is a completely different unit. In the first place, it's not even 11 inches. It's 11 and a half inches. And it weighs less by about 30 pounds than the Netgain Warp 11. This one's 223 pounds. I believe the Warp 11 is 256. It's 11 and a half inches in diameter. That would be a good reason to call it the Warp 11.5. I've suggested he should call it Kong because this motor has some interesting features I think are going to make our E-Cobra go very well. In order to talk about them, we have to talk about a little bit about how a motor works. And I've noticed in the EV community, certainly on the forums, a rather divergent level of expertise on how electric motors work at all and how we got here. Most of the little I know about comes from a book by Nehemiah Hawkins that was printed in 1927. And in any description of motors, you will probably find little diagrams that look a little archaic. That's because they stole them all out of this book. I'll put a reference to it up on the screen. You can go get it in PDF format. It's actually quite well done, a bit tedious. Let's talk about the basic motors that we have so we can drill down to what we've selected here. The two basic forms of a motor would be your commutated DC motor, and your AC induction motor. The commutated DC motor was the first one invented. It's well over 150 years old. Well, I guess they had some electric motors shortly after the turn of the century, 1805, something like that. The AC induction motor is very interesting in that it was invented wholly and solely by a man named Nikola Tesla, who contrived, a Serbian who immigrated to the United States. He built this motor entirely in his mind, was unable to actually build it physically for several years, and the first prototype worked pretty much as he had envisioned it, and in fact we use it to this day. A couple of basic principles. If you have a magnetic field, first, if you run a current through a wire, the act of moving current through the wire will create a magnetic field, and I'm representing these as what we call magnetic lines of flux, but a magic field. And current through a wire creates a magnetic field. Current through a coil creates a concentrated magnetic field. Similarly, if you move a wire through a magnetic field, that induces a current in the wire. And these are very real effects, and they're not really faint. They're quite pronounced. I'm going to start with the AC induction motor because it's really simpler as a motor, although the electronics get to be a little involved. An AC motor has, let me draw, if I might, a coil. Let's go over and do another coil here. If we run current through these coils, it will set up a field. And that's what's going to drive the motor. The armature, if I might draw it, the field and the case would be called the stator. It does not move. The armature or rotor does, and that's where your shaft goes. And an AC induction motor has rings on the end that connect all this, and then it has little rods that we will refer to as coils. They're pretty simple. They simply go from one ring to the other ring and then back around the other side on the back side, and that forms a coil. If we apply this field to the field coils, we build this field because these are wires. It induces a current in the wires, and the current is of the opposite polarity. And so those wires, because of the current through them that's induced, will also develop a field. And those fields largely oppose. And I'm introducing this because we're going to break this circuit later to explain something that goes all the way to the heart of our 11 HV motor. You have a complete loop here, a complete coil that has a complete path. And so this field can cause current flow that goes in a complete direction. There's no buildup of voltage there. It's just an induced current. And so it will create its own field, and those fields can oppose. In order for this to turn, we have to rotate the outside field. And so on an AC induction motor, you'll typically have 3 coils. This is a simplified version with 3 sine waves applied that are 120 degrees out of phase. And so as your rotor rotates, that same coil is affected by 3 different waveforms. You can do this with any number of poles and any number of phases, but sort of the minimum would be 3. And that was the original Tesla motor, which he called the polyphase motor, not an AC induction motor, actually, AC polyphase motor. So that's the basic operation of it. The rotor in the AC induction motor, or armature, I suppose, the coils are slightly angled to prevent cogging, to get a smooth transition between the phases. And the rotor will never rotate as fast as the frequency of this rotating electronic field. And that rotating field is what we call electronic commutation. We have no commutator, and we'll get to that in a minute, what a commutator is. The part I want you to be cognizant of is that those coils have a complete path, and so they don't really develop much in the way of voltage. And for that reason, and because we have no brushes and a much simpler motor, we can go to very high RPMs with this motor. The problem is that it doesn't really develop very much torque. You're relying on the interaction of a magnetic field caused by current with a magnetic field that's just induced. And this will lag that rotation. We refer to that as slip. And so you constantly have to tune your electronic commutation to the position of your motor, and that's why an AC induction motor, you'll normally have an encoder or resolver giving motor position. You wind up with 3 different power outputs, and their relationship, both in amplitude and frequency, are extremely important. And the relationship between this rotation, or this phase frequency, and the actual rotor become extremely important. And it leads to a whole series of mathematical calculations, space vector modulation, and the Clark transform, which are quite complex. And that's why, although the motor is simpler, your AC systems that you see today are typically 3 times in cost what ours are. It's primarily a function of the power output stage of a 3-phase controller, which they also call an inverter, or a variable frequency drive. Historically, EVs have been more on the commutated DC motor. There is a motor between these two, but let's talk about the commutated DC motor first. The commutated DC motor has our windings here, our field windings. Let me draw that this way. And they build up a magnetic field. Let me draw it like this. And then here is our rotor. And again, it is cylindrical, and it does feature the same coils They're individual windings that then go around the back side, but here they are tied to a commutator. They're never allowed to touch, and the way we get current is, let's take our current from our field and go through a brush and actually touch a segment here that connects to one end of the coil, and another brush that connects to the other end of the coil, and then out. And this is a series DC motor. We come in, go through our two field windings, marked S1 and S2 on the Netgain, and then go through our two brushes, which is in one brush, through the coil length of the rotor or armature, and out the other brush. This coil then develops its own magnetic field inside of here, and that field will interact with this one. Because both of them are fed by current from the batteries, and in fact the same current, this is actually a much more powerful interaction, and so we can get greater torque from this. What I want you to know here is that when these brushes are not contacting two ends of this, they are open. The two ends are not connected. In fact, you don't have a coil, but you do have a wire. There is some variance or something in between, and that's called a brushless DC motor. In the end, it winds up with almost the same complexity of drive electronics as the electronic commutated motor or AC induction motor. We call it a brushless DC motor, and it's based on magnets. In that case, you have your field windings and a rotor that doesn't have any windings on it at all. It has some permanent magnets. I'll just lay in a permanent magnet embedded in this rotor, and we'll call this one a plus, and this one a minus, and this one a plus, and this one a minus, and they alternate in polarity, but they're permanent magnets. Typically today, neodymium magnets or rare earth magnets, some combination of neodymium, beryllium, manganese, and so forth, that are ostensibly have their own magnetic field permanently. Because of the lack of the windings, this is a very simple motor and can be made much more compactly. One of the problems is the tendency of the magnets to demagnetize in the presence of heat. When we have the magnets on the surface of the rotor, it's called the surface permanent magnet, brushless DC motor. And there is another way of doing it. Here's a cross section of the rotor. If I bury the magnets inside the rotor, it's called an internal permanent magnet motor. Almost all of the motors used by the OEMs today for electric vehicles are internal permanent magnet motors. Brushless DC motors, kind of between the commutated DC motor, and there's no need for commutation here because we don't have to switch in any direction. And in fact, we have no coils. So these are fairly simple motors, fairly hardy, and they can be made very compact for the power output that they put out. And so they're quite popular among the OEMs. But the drive stage tends to be quite similar to the polyphase AC induction motor. The DC series motor we've kind of taken apart here, and I want to show you some of the pieces so we can pursue this discussion. This is from our first Netgain Warp 9 motor. It was built in October of 2008, and Brian has taken it apart today, so it doesn't operate at all. And I don't know if we'll ever get it back together, but this is the rotor or armature of the motor. They have this casting here is simply a fan to try to get some airflow across here. I don't know if you can see this. Brian, zoom in a bit, but these are the windings. They're made of copper, and they're actually a flat copper bar. Note that we put 1,000 amps through one of these Netgains here just recently, so don't picture little coils of wire. Picture a flat copper bar. It's kind of bent, goes through these slots. This is a laminated core to reduce eddy currents. And then this bar curls over, goes around the shaft, and comes back on the other side. There's actually 50 or 25 pairs of these ends. And if you take one end and the end on the other side, they are connected in this shape. And they're also connected to a segment on the commutator. The commutator is a surface where we can run the brushes and make contact with them. Each of these segments, and there are 49 or 50, are separated by an insulator, typically a mica mineral. And your brushes, and this is the brush end, are connected. Let's see, here's A2, and it's connected with a bar to this brush, and then it has a cable that goes around and connects A1 to the opposing brush. A2 is to two opposing brushes, and A1 is the other two. And these brushes actually ride on the commutator, and they have springs that allow them to ride up and down, and little wires, actually pretty heavy wires that connect them to this bar. So the weakest point in your whole motor is probably these brush wires, but you have two of them to each brush, and but they carry most of the current going through the motor. When the brushes are connected to the two ends, you have the series connection for current flow. When they are not connected, they pose a problem. This is our case of our motor, and you can see how the windings actually are made. They're flat pieces of copper coiled around lengthwise along the motor and around a core. And so let me kind of draw this for you. Here's your case. And then you have a core of ferrous iron that comes up like this, and it too has a curved surface. And then your windings are wound around this core in layers. And of course, the whole thing runs lengthwise along the motor, and that makes your fields. We have 8 brushes here. There's actually a pair for each brush, and that's to kind of ensure contact on there. The springs kind of ensure contact. When we talk about radiusing a brush, they need to wear in a curved shape on the edge to match the commutator. And typically, a brush is wide enough to connect to about 2 or 2.5 commutator bars. And so that's kind of the situation. Let's talk about our field. Let me try to draw another picture that's simplified. I said we had 4 segments. You see we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 field windings. Let's reduce that by half to simplify. And I'm going to say here's our motor case. And here is our field iron. And here's our windings. If I go over here, I can draw kind of the same thing. Here's our field iron. Here's our case. And again, this is an end section of the motor. And you notice this field iron has a couple purposes. It provides the structure for the coils, guards them from the rotor. But they're of a ferrous iron that concentrate the magnetic lines of flux in a certain direction, kind of like an antenna, parabolic antenna would focus a transmission. This focuses these lines of flux. For our rotor, let me get some different colors here. Our rotor's going to come out pretty much to those irons. By the way, these irons are held to the case by these hex bolts here. Don't loosen those or use them for motor mounts. That's what holds those in position, and you could severely damage the motor if you pull those and then try to. They hold this field iron in place. Here's our rotor. And again, it is in segments. We have 50 of these going around the rotor. This is the commutator I'm drawing. And I'm going to say that this one mates with this one. We're going to draw a brush here that contacts our commutator here and here. And so, let's get another pin. I'm going to bring in S1 and connect it to here. I'm going to take this and bring it over here, connect it to this, and come out. We'll call this S1 and this S2. That's for stator, the stationary part of your motor, and that's what's connected to your field winding. And I'm going to call this A1 to the brush, and this A2 to the brush. And there are several ways we could hook this up, but let's hook S2 to A1 and put our positive in here and our negative in here. And we have a complete circuit through this coil and out here. I'm going to draw this a little differently. This is our lines of magnetic flux. And let's say that they go directly across our motor here. And let's say that this goes the other way. This is the magnetic field by our winding. The one winding we have current to. When they are at 90 degrees, that is the maximum point of leverage. And where this really plays out is in this air gap that's totally saturated between the rotor and the field iron. And when they're at exactly 90 degrees of each other, that's the maximum torque that you'll have. And we happen to call this line, this is not part of anything, this is an imaginary line. It goes right through here. I'm going to call that the neutral plane. And that is this 90-degree point where we get maximum power by the interaction of the magnetic field from the current going through our rotor coil, or two of them. I guess the brushes span about two of them, and our field coils. And that's where our torque, the force of moment of this reaction, occurs to turn the armature. And that, of course, is where our shaft is. Now, here's the problem. We have a lot of other coils going around here that are not part of the 2 to 2.5, our top two and our bottom two coils. And in fact, they're not terminated. They're simply a big coil, but it's not connected at the ends. They're just bare down here. Current cannot flow through them. But what did we say about a wire moving through a magnetic field? It induces a current in the wire. As we rotate the armature, this wire is going to move through that very powerful magnetic field. And it's going to try to induce current. Now, what do I mean by that? We're going to try to make all the electrons, this is negative, positive, to move in this direction. And we're going to try to make current flow, that direction is that movement of electrons. But there's no place for them to go. So we wind up with all our electrons piled up here. These are all negatives now. And I suppose conversely, our holes would be piled up here, and our electrons piled up here, and they have no place to go. Well, that is a difference of potential, just like a battery. We've just described a battery almost. We have a positive lack of electrons and a negative charge, which is too many electrons, and that is a voltage. And it's an induced voltage. We tried to induce a current, but there was no path for it. And so that voltage builds. Now it's going to be at its maximum right here. When these windings are right here, we would have the maximum induced voltage in that coil. And conversely, here in the neutral plane, we would have the minimum voltage induced. And actually, as we pass through that, then it reverses, and this becomes positive, and this becomes negative. And the electrons swing back the other direction, and so they're racing alternately from one end of the wire to the other end of the wire, induced by this magnetic field as they pass through it at right angles. And so this is our maximum voltage point, and this is our minimum voltage point 90 degrees later, and that happens to be where our brushes feed in the current to create our own rotor magnetic field to drive the motor. So this is a side effect. A couple of things happen. One, this voltage, of course, is trying to induce current in the other direction, and that's opposed by the energy in the magnetic field. This is not free. This is a little war, and those forces oppose. As we spin, the maximum point, as I said, is at 90 degrees, but as we spin this faster, these forces, the amount of current induced in a wire is a function of the strength of the magnetic field and the speed of the wire. So as we go up in RPMs, this increases dramatically. And what we would call that is an electromotive force or voltage that runs counter to the force that we're putting in with the field. And in fact, they call this a counter electromotive force, or CEMF. At some point of RPM, this becomes so great that the voltage driving the current through the field cannot make it go any faster. And that's why in a series DC motor, you'll find that your RPM is constrained. The amount of power that you put out is constrained by the voltage you can apply to the motor. So a 72 volt motor will only develop power up to a certain RPM, where a 144 volt motor would go quite beyond that. And so on as you go up in voltage. And so the higher the voltage, you've seen our torque curves before. We start out, if this is RPM, and this is current, if we put maximum current, we start out with our torque curve, but as we go up in RPM, it starts to fall off. And with our Netgain Warp 9 in the Speedster, I guess that fall off, which would be our maximum horsepower point, fell at about 3,200 RPM. Had we been able to apply a higher voltage, and we were sagging to 147 volts at 1,000 amps, if we'd have been able to keep it up at 200, that would have moved out to 3,400 or 3,600 RPM. And so the maximum RPM where you can still make full torque is a function of your available battery voltage, because of this counter EMF that builds up in the unused coils of your motor as it turns. Remember, we're turning using these two or three that our brushes are in contact with. We run current through them. It has a field, and it rotates the armature. But as we go up in speed, we start to induce not currents, because there's no current path, voltages, and so a resistance, or in AC systems and induction, we normally call it reactance. But picture a resistance to the further input of power. If you applied 140 volts in, and there were 70 volts of back EMF, you're effectively driving current through your series with 70 volts. At some point, the difference in voltage is not sufficient to develop any appreciable power, and that's effectively the limit of your useful RPM in the motor. So that's counter EMF. The reason I want to bring that up is that it has another devastating effect on a series DC motor. Recall, it's important that this brush come in contact with this when there's 0 volts on this coil. If there's a voltage, it will likely be of the wrong polarity, and the voltage across the brushes and the voltage in the coil will interact, and you'll have a big nasty spark, an arc. Well, there's a problem in that we're going to mess up this whole deal, and we're going to use an effect they call the armature reaction. All of the forces in here are infinitely reactive to each other. Everything has an effect on everything else. This is kind of a simplified view of it. We have our neutral plane. As we turn up this rotor, let's take a look at this field that's going across here, supposedly straight. It gets warped. We have warped our field. By the action of this rotating mass of iron and copper and so forth, it kind of has an antenna effect just like our field irons does. And because it's spinning, and because of this counter EMF, we have what's called an armature reaction, and the field is bent. Now the problem with that is, here's our brushes right on our commutator, and they're right here, but our neutral plane has just rotated. And instead of being through here, it's through here. And so the commutator segments that are under the brushes are not neutral. They have induced voltage from this passage through the field. Now that voltage, as it passes, will go from 0 at one neutral point to a maximum at 90 degrees. So we're 0 here, we're at maximum at 90 degrees. We go back to 0 here, and then we go the other direction where we're at maximum here, and come back to 0 here. But we've just shifted, because of this warpage in the field, our neutral plane, to where we have some voltage at this point, because our plane has shifted to the right in the direction of the rotation. And this causes arcing of the brushes. Arcing is a problem. It can totally destroy a motor, but it's in no point good for it. These brushes contact fairly clean copper here, and it's important that that copper be very smooth and the surface of the brush very smooth. And you have your pressure of these springs, which is actually quite critical. And they ride on this. And as it goes up in speed, they kind of float and do some things. But we don't want arcing on that commutator, because that arc, that jump of voltage across there, causes a deterioration of the surface of the commutator, and to a lesser degree the surface of the brushes. As these pit and get little cinders on them, they become resistive. They do not carry current as well as they did, and so you start to have the buildup of heat. and as you have more heat, you have more resistance, and you're on the death spiral for your motor, and eventually your commutator is destroyed. During some high current events at 1,000 amps and several hundred volts, as you would have in a drag race or something, you'll actually see arcing occur, and the commutator basically explode. And it all happens so quickly because this is at such a high RPM, and we have such high induced voltages in these off coils that it really, you can destroy it in milliseconds. So this arcing is a problem. What do we do about that? Well, the solution for Netgain is to advance the brushes 12 degrees advanced. And you have seen this on the end of your motor. You have a neutral and an advanced thing. It's actually marked on the end of the case, and you can actually change that advance. They've set this 12 degrees experimentally, just running the motor on a dynamometer at 72 volts and so forth, and align that for minimum arcing. And during the normal RPMs, they expect the motor to be operated at, and the normal currents. When you increase to 1,000 amps, you're outside of their range that they test on a dynamometer. They have a 72 volt dynamometer or field motors. You're outside the voltage range. But 12 degrees is their best guess, and that's why we have this advance, is to prevent arcing. And that's their best wag. It's sort of a compromise. This armature reaction and the neutral plane will actually rotate and change position based mainly on the RPM of the rotor. So at 100 RPM, it's at one place. At 5,000, 6,000 RPM, it's another place. And so that 12 degrees is more or less effective depending on what RPM you're at. And it does ameliorate it some. This all has some unfortunate effects for us. One of them is that if you advance your brushes to minimize arcing, if you reverse the direction of the motor, you're going to have severe arcing, even at fairly low power levels. And so you don't really want an electric reverse in a series wound DC motor. Use the transmission reverse. The other one is, there is kind of a way to do regenerative braking on a series DC motor. You can simply reverse your connections and use it as a generator. But if you have the brushes advanced, this doesn't work very well at all. And again, you have severe arcing, and you'll destroy your commutator and brushes very shortly. Let's see, what are some of the other disadvantages of this? So reversing is kind of out of the question, certainly at any speed. The regenerative braking is sort of out of the question. And so that's some of the disadvantages. At some voltage, the 12 degrees doesn't work. And so traditionally, Netgain has said they would like to see you limit the voltage on a Netgain motor to 170 volts DC. And most people observe that. With the new Hellwig brushes, we've done some work up to 190, 200 volts. We haven't done it under extreme load yet, but on the Redux, we do 147 volts at 1,000 amps. We operate at 190 volts at lower current levels. But I think you could probably go up to 190 volts with your 12-degree advance because of the split nature of the Hellwig brushes. And so that's an improvement. But you don't really want to go much beyond that. Again, our power curve is constrained in RPM by primarily that counter electromotive force or your maximum voltage. So we can't go beyond 170 or 190 volts on the motor, and we have to go beyond that to get power in the upper RPM bands. A sports car, one of the criticisms I've had of Redux is that it makes its power down too low. I'm used to a sports car making it in the 4,000 range, 4,500, not 2,800. But we're constrained by voltage. If we could do higher voltage, we could do higher RPMs. The actual bearings in the motor are good to about 14,000 RPM in these motors, I'm told. The centrifugal forces on our commutator, which is made up of segments that kind of lock on this rotor, and then our coils, if you notice, they're banded with some fiberglass here and some glued fiberglass. Here's an interesting thing. This is a little bit of clay that's fired onto the motor. That was put there to balance the motor. They don't really remove material from any of the metal. They just add little bits of clay, and then when they bake the motor, those harden, and that is how they balance the rotor. And so I'm told by George Hamstra that the actual limitations on the motor is this commutator is probably good to about 9,000 RPM. Now they're double banding some of this instead of a single band, and doing some other things that this rotor will hold together to about 9,000 RPM. The bearings are good to 14,000 RPM. And so what's our constraint? It's, again, voltage. And we simply cannot go beyond a 200 or perhaps a little higher volts with this motor. And so our RPM, where we can make any significant power, is probably to 5,500, they say, or 6,000 RPM. And certainly the peak is down around 3,000 RPM. We'd like to make more power, higher currents and higher voltages to give us higher power, and we'd like to do that at a higher RPM. Okay, so our mission is to have higher torque at higher RPMs, and the only way we can do that is to increase the voltage on our motor, maintaining the same current. And that's where the 11HV comes into play. It's kind of a variation on the motor that's a little bit interesting. Recall, a little simplified version. Here's our fields. And here's our rotor with our brushes, and the problem was caused by a warpage of this field. The solution, of course, is to advance the brushes, and if we can do that dynamically, that would be the solution. Since we can't, let's do something different and put another field iron here and here. And let's put a coil around it to where it creates a magnetic field. And I want this magnetic field to influence our original magnetic field in the reverse fashion that our armature reaction does. So as we rotate to the right, and we want to twist our field this way, we're going to run current through these coils and warp it back. And of course, more current is more RPM, so as we put more current through the motor, we will put the same current through here. Now that field will be a function of our windings, how many windings, and so we can tune that to where this takes a little bit of our power and uses it to rewarp that field backwards. And so because it changes with RPM and that changes with current, we will constantly be trying to keep this neutral plane neutral. And that will minimize arcing, and it will maximize that 90 degrees where we get our maximum torque effect on that rotor. Those are two good things. One of the bad things is it takes a little power in this field to correct the primary field. And these are called interpoles. There's one problem with the interpoles. If you look at your motor here, I have 4 field irons and 4 field windings, and I would estimate it's less than a half an inch between each of those. So we don't have 2 field irons, we have 4. And they're actually, look, let's say this is our whole case. Here's one of them. Here's one. Here's one. And here's one. Our interpoles would go between them in order to correct that field. Well, there's no place for them. So what we have to do is make a place. Let's draw our motor case, and let's put this and this and this and this with enough room. I don't need a whole lot where I can put a field iron for my interpoles in here, 2 or 3 inches. Well, that's okay. Except, if you look, my windings go past my field irons anyway. And so if I do that and I make these narrower, I have to have fewer coils. Well, wait a minute. The power of my motor is a function of that magnetic field, which is a function of 2 things: how much current I put through it and how many windings of the coils I have. I can't make my conductor smaller because I still need to take 1,000 amps. So because this section is smaller, I lose coils. Well, how about this? Let's make our motor bigger around, and we'll make our fields narrower but taller. And now I can put a double layer of coils. They won't be as big around, but they'll be taller. And this will be taller in the motor. We'll make it twice as high and a little bit narrower, and we can have the same number of coils. Well, cool, except that shrinks my rotor size. I've only got 1/10 of an inch anyway, and now my rotor is down not much bigger than my shaft. So what do we do about that? That's kind of an important consideration, by the way. All of this occurs here at the coil. The coil is at the surface of our rotor, as we all know. And that field comes from there and interacts with our field here. here's our shaft in the middle. This distance here from the coil to the shaft, you could think of as a lever arm. Here's my shaft, and if I just stick a little 1-foot steel bar there and turn that shaft with my hand, I'm going to get a certain amount of force on that shaft. If I'll double the length of that bar, I have a lot more leverage on it, and it works the same way in a motor. So my diameter here is a function. If I put exactly the same current and exactly the same voltage in an 11-inch motor as I did in a 9-inch motor, I get more torque out of the 11-inch motor because of the lever arm. And so there's some trade-offs going on here. What they did was took a slightly larger case. Like I say, it's 11.5 inches. And they did narrow the field windings and stack them taller. And when they did, they found out that this hole that they had left for a rotor was almost exactly the size of a Netgain Warp 9 rotor, 4 inches here instead of 5, and probably 6 inches here instead of 5. And so they put a Netgain Warp 9 rotor in a case a little bit bigger than a Warp 11 and wound it to have the field coils twice as tall but half as broad, and put interpoles in there, and that allows the correction of this neutral plane.
EVTV Electric Vehicle Systems presents the Soliton 1 controller. 1,000 amps of continuous power at up to 340 volts. Enough power to drive your dream car while automatically protecting your precious battery pack. Built-in contactors and pre-charge circuit reduces parts count. Each Soliton 1 controller undergoes rigorous dynamometer qualification. An easy-to-use web interface configuration with real-time data logger through an Ethernet connection. The only controller with programmable idle function ideal for automatic transmissions. Liquid cooling for high power operation. EVTV Soliton 1. Very dangerous, very high voltage.
Okay, let's summarize a little bit. I do want to introduce one final kind of motor. How can I'll have to draw all this again, I guess. Here's our case. Do you ever see a grown man that just could not draw a circle? Here's our field irons. Here's our field coils. Recall we had this to S1. This to S2. We had a brush to A1, a brush to A2, and our rotor. Now we're saying that one of the reasons that restricts our RPM or our power at higher RPM is the counter EMF that is induced by this field, the magnetic field of our field coils, in the unused open coils of the rotor. Is there some way if there was some way we could reduce that, we could increase our power and our speed without having the arcing. Well, there is a way, and that is to connect our rotor current to one power supply and our field to another power supply. If we went up in RPM, our voltage induced as counter EMF would increase, would it not? But if we decreased our current through our field, we would decrease that voltage. Now, somehow we have to separately control the current through our field and the current through our rotor. In fact, we could increase the current through the rotor and maintain the same power while we decrease the current through our field to decrease the back EMF as we go up in RPM. I would say that we would excite our field coil with one voltage, and we would excite our rotor coil with another voltage to create two completely separate fields. And we would call this a separately excited DC motor. Little known fact, don't tell George where you found out. There is a Sepex Warp 9 available. You have to know to ask. And there are some Sepex controllers out there, usually Kelly's and things like that. That's all a doable thing. So that's the Sepex motor. To summarize our problem, it really comes from counter EMF, the induction of inducement of voltages, not currents, because there is current, but it's from one end of the wire to the other to create a voltage or a counter EMF in the unused, unbrushed, uncommutated segments of our rotor coils. This restricts our RPM. It causes arcing, and the arcing restricts how much applied voltage we can get to this. By using interpoles, we directly attack arcing and so can increase our applied voltage and wind up with higher power at the same we end up with higher power because we have a higher voltage at the same current. So if we could, if we are restricted to 170 volts and 1,000 amps on our motor, that's 170 kilowatts in. We're going to get about 85% of that to the wheels. And that is, here's the problem, our batteries sag, but we can't exceed the 170, even at low power levels, 100 amps. And so we wind up with the sag range of our batteries from 170 down to 130. And so we really don't get 170 kilowatts. We might get 130 or 140 kilowatts. With the Hellwigs, we're running at 192 volts. We sagged 147, but I've got almost a 200 kilowatt power pack there that I'm doing 150 kilowatts on in, and I get about 85% of that out. If we could go to 240 volts and 1,000 amps, I've got 240 kilowatts sagging to, let's say, 200. I actually get 200 kilowatts power into the motor, and that'd be 170 kilowatts to the wheel. This Interpoled 11-inch motor is advertised at good for 240 volts. I'm told that it actually is quite safe to 288 volts. And there have been people try to blow them up at 336 volts, and unfortunately they did a pretty good job. And so that's kind of your range, but we could go up to 288 volts on this motor. And at a 20% sag, we're at 56 volts. We'd still be at 230 kilowatts in this car if I could get 288 volts batteries in the Cobra. We're not going to be able to, but we're going to shoot for 240. We may have to settle for 220. But it'll certainly be up around 200 kilowatts as a power plant. And that divided by 746, if I can get 200 kilowatts, divided by 746 is 268 horsepower. And that should move that car pretty briskly. The other thing, since we can go to higher RPMs, we have another target of opportunity. We have, in the Speedster Part Deux, gone to a very, do we call them higher gears or lower gears? It's a lower number. We use a 3.44 ring and pinion instead of a 388. And this gives us less leverage at lower RPMs, but when we get to our RPM restrictions, we keep in our power band at the upper end. And that's why we did that. If we move not only the amount of power we can put into the motor, but the RPMs at which it is manifest by going to a higher voltage, we do not need to go to those higher, lower, taller, shorter gears, whatever the proper term is. And we can go back to a 392 or a 411 on that Ford rear end, which we can get parts to be any RPM we want, in any ratio we want back there. And in fact, we're probably going to put a limited slip differential. Right now, my calculations on the tire sizes we have, it would work very well at a 4.11 ratio in that rear end instead of the 3.25 that Brian put in specifically for us for this electric thing. So by going to an Interpole motor and a higher voltage, it's not just that we get more power, but we can change the way we use that power by running our peak at a higher RPM. I'm hoping somewhere around 4,000 or 4,200 RPM will be our peak now instead of down around 2,800, 3,000. And so we can do some good with a differently geared rear end and have a tremendous increase in acceleration off the line, which as I understand it, is the desired outcome on this car, is straight line acceleration. No one seems to care about my nimble, graceful, light concept of cars. In true American fashion, apparently our Chinese customers on board with this, it's I want to take off and go like a scalded dog. And we're trying our best, Paul, to get you there. It's causing a lot of head scratching. And part of it is just not very good information out there about the 11HV. So I literally had to drag some of this information out of George Hamstra. He calls it the 11HV, which makes it sound like a slightly modified 11-inch warp motor. In truth, he started with a GE design from years ago. It's much higher RPM, much higher voltage, and consequently a considerable different power and different power band than the other motors in his line. I told him to call it Kong, but sort of King Kong versus Godzilla. But it has really very little to do with a Netgain Warp 11 motor. It's not even 11 inches. It's 11 and a half by my measuring stick. It is painted the same red, and I'm campaigning for designer colors at Netgain, but we'll see how far that gets me. This episode of EVTV is brought to you by the Winston Battery Company Limited, makers of high-capacity lithium-yttrium rare earth cells, including the popular 160 amp-hour model featuring cycle lives in excess of 5,000 cycles when discharged to 70%, the longest useful working life of any available battery of any chemistry. A leading battery technology scientist, inventor, and entrepreneur since 1995, Mr. Winston Chung envisions a new world of clean electric power for the dawn of a new era of electric vehicles. For your next electric vehicle design project, contact Winston Battery Limited. Energy for a bright future. And so we're going to use the Netgain Warp 11 HV Kong motor, which has interpoles, and that should get us higher up in the RPM band, hopefully into the 4,000s, and usefully maybe a little power in the 6,000-7,000 range. I don't have much need to press 9,000 RPM, but you would be able to do it with this motor if you want to. In this car, if you want to drag race it, it will probably be okay up to about 9. There is another consideration I'm going to talk about. It's not that I'd like to talk about it, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And that is this little casting, which is supposed to act as a fan in the motor, and it is better than nothing. One of the disadvantages of these commutated motors is we don't really have any good way to liquid cool them. And that means we don't really have any good way to cool them at all, as far as I'm concerned. The heat is down here. And normally, as it turns, air would be drawn into the area where the commutator is, and that's where the heat is, and move through the motor and is expelled out some exhausts up close to your adapter plate. This is all well and good, but it depends on RPM to get any airflow at all, and really our maximum point of issue is taking off. We're at a high current, low RPM, and almost no cooling air situation. Now, it really doesn't take too much cooling air, but I found a way to overdo that as well as everything else. This is actually a Garrett supercharger, turbocharger, I suppose, a Garrett turbocharger that is quite used, and a guy who has a website at turboxs.com takes these old Garrett used superchargers and just uses the frame and puts an electric motor and a little fan on here and a K&R air filter. And this little puppy at 12 volts will put out 435 cubic feet per minute, or maybe it's 434. You can sue me on the foot error, but it's either 434 or 435. So it puts out quite a bit of air. It does have a noise profile, but I've heard worse. And it is filtered air that we can then make a shroud to put over the end of the motor with what we're using is a piece of VW heating system tubing that we weld into a flat sheet of light aluminum and bend over this and connect it all on here. And then that lets us mount this forced air cooling system onto the motor. And it does break our quiet solitude a bit, but it will make this motor, I'm convinced, last much longer and be able to do much more power, particularly at low RPMs, without damage to the commutator and the brushes particularly, but general damage across the board. And so I'm coming to view the Netgain Warp motors primarily because of the availability of something like this. Now, this is $350, but this motor that we're using lists for $3,750, and I'd like it to last. So this is my BMS for my motor. my motor management system, is if I can blow enough air up its skirt, I think it'll last longer. Finally, I'd note this little clay in here. I wasn't really too aware of this until Alex Viera mentioned it yesterday on Tim Cavalier's. If you're having vibration problems with your motor, if some of this breaks loose, it's going to go out of balance. And so that's a possibility on vibrations. Eric Chris has been contacting me about some problems he's having with his AC50. I don't know if they do the same thing. I would assume not, but it's not really such an open motor, but it is air cooled. And maybe they balance them with clay as well. So that's, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look inside while I'm explaining this, to actually see some of the parts of the motor and the way they're laid out. This, of course, is your brush assembly, and your brushes encircle your commutator, and that's how you get current flow through these coils on your armature or rotor. These are your field coils, and in order to make room for interpoles in the other motor, they simply stack these higher and narrower and then put similar coils in between for the interpoles. That shrunk the diameter room inside, and so they used a warp 9 rotor inside an 11.5-inch frame to be able to make all that go. That costs us a little bit in our torque arm for this motor, but I think the gains in keeping that commutator plane, the neutral plane, aligned with where our brushes are is kind of key. We're going to be looking into some further things. Of course, we could reverse the motor electrically now because we're not, and you do not advance the brushes at all on a 11 HV. Do not induce any advance there whatsoever. And secondly, there's some possibility, I have to take a look at what he did on the angle on the brushes and so forth on the commutator, but there is an outside possibility, and it certainly would not happen for this car, but we're going to take a look at some point in seeing if we could adopt a 11 HV for regenerative braking and do some experiments with that. It could be done on a DC motor. The primary reason it hasn't is brush angle and advance to limit arcing. With interpoles, that should be unnecessary, and it opens up the possibility. I'm not going to say it would be as easy as a AC induction motor or a permanent magnet brushless DC motor, but it could conceivably be done. This has been long and tedious, and I would apologize, but we've had so many motor questions, and this is a good time in selecting a motor. I thought it might be worthwhile to go through some of the issues and trade-offs in motor design that these people have to go through in basically 100-year-old technology. The motors have been around for a very long time, but there's an infinite number of variables in here. You could go crazy trying to come up with exactly the right combination. I've been a little rattled just trying to come up with a motor. I'm used to doing cars for myself, and the responsibility of doing them for somebody else, I can hardly take it. But I think we've come up with a good combination here with this Tremec TKO 600 and this Warp 11 HV. We're still doing the survey on controllers. Obviously, our recent experience has been with Evnetics and the Soliton 1, and we may again dance with the one that brung us on that, but I'm looking around to see if there's any new developments or new controllers out there that might be interesting with this motor. But I'm persuaded by George and by the design criteria he's got in this motor that this package could be competition level if that's what you want in an electric Cobra. It could be pretty strong. We'll see. The proof is on the dynamometer and doing the acceleration tests. But by going to a higher, lower, shorter, taller, whatever, 4.11 rear end with the ratios in that transmission and that motor, I think it will depart the area with all due haste.
Masterflux proudly presents the Sierra Series brushless DC variable speed electric compressors. The Masterflux family of compressors are up to 40% smaller and lighter than competing belt-driven DC automotive compressors. Masterflux uses rare earth neodymium magnets for longer life and greater efficiency. The robust rotary design is ideally suited for rugged EV applications. With a scroll-type compressor, the process begins with the refrigerant entering the evaporator from the suction side. Refrigerant then travels through a reed valve to the top of the compressor, where it is compressed at up to 8 times the incoming pressure before exiting out the discharge tube to the condenser. Masterflux compressors are available in 400 to 15,000 BTU per hour capacity range for multiple refrigerants, including 134A. Output can be manually adjusted using a simple 0 to 5 volt pot. Masterflux compressors are available to handle input voltages of 12 to 420 volts DC and come with a specific BLDC motor controller for each voltage range. The new Masterflux 2011 product catalog can be downloaded from their website at www.masterflux.com. Masterflux products are available in the US from Revolt Custom Electric Vehicles, in Australia from EV Works, and in South Asia from EV World. Masterflux, the technically elegant choice for powerful electric air conditioning.